Hey kids. This is Phil here from the Guild Ball Tonight podcast, and one of the questions that I get asked somewhat frequently is uh, generally about and specifically often where to get the clear acrylic bases that I somewhat notoriously use on my all of my Guild Ball figures, and so I thought that I thought that I would talk a bit about that tonight. So, why clear bases, right? Like, what is it that made me want to do something so sort of silly? Well, I would like to pretend that I had some sort of insight or perhaps some sort of noble motivation, but really I think what it boils down to is that clear bases allow you to be incredibly lazy without actually looking like you were incredibly lazy, because it kind of takes a whole step out of making your miniature. But more specifically, I think that I can cover for my essential laziness by stating a few other reasons why clear acrylic bases I think are great. Now, of course, the probably the most obvious reason to go with a clear acrylic base, and here we have our good friend Brick on his clear base. I think one of the tricks to the clear bases, and really the real reason that I use them is that for me, aesthetics are a real a huge motivator. And one thing that I always intensely disliked was the way that so often bases would clash with the terrain of a board. There's sort of nothing more frustrating to me than having green grass bases on an urban or desert or snow packed board, or vice versa. Whatever sort of base design you have, if it doesn't match the terrain it's standing on, it's just always been sort of artistically unappealing to me, especially in uh, figures that you're actually playing the game with. Like, I think that a good scenic base is fantastic for a showpiece or for a competition piece, because that's part of the presentation of that work of art. But I think for miniatures that you are specifically playing the game with, for me anyway, actually having that base match the terrain that you're playing on is a real advantage. And of course, you can't always dictate the terrain that you're playing on, especially if you are away from home or if you have multiple board setups available at home. If you've got the Proving Grounds mat and the Fields of Glory mat, except for that little spot in the middle, they're not exactly a perfect match either. So for me, clear plastic bases were a way to sort of uh, get what I wanted, which was bases that sort of always match. Because the thing about the clear plastic is, pretty much anywhere you put it, it's just going to match whatever you happen to put it on. And kind of obvious, right? But not something that I've seen frequently. I mean, I will never claim that I originated this idea. I had the idea, but I had it many years after many others did. And I don't know, I really like it. So I guess that's the why. So now let's talk a little bit more about the how. So where do I get my bases? I get my bases from Litko. That is litko.net. I'm not sure if there's a more convenient supplier for all of you overseas guys, but that is where I get mine. They are US based. So, you just order a bag of these. I think when you get, you can get like 50 bases for something like $10 to $12. It's not it's not a trivial expense, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not terribly pricey either. And so the process is pretty simple. I actually paint the miniature usually on either a standard base. Like here's Bonesaw. He's not quite done yet, but he's coming along. Or if the figure has sort of a smaller footprint, I like to put them on corks just to have a nice little handle down there. So I paint the figure that way. Now usually before the figure is painted, I will have already cut it off the base tab. I will have drilled and put a pin into one or both contact points. Usually the feet, and I'll have that pin will be about that deep into the cork, just to hold it there. And then after it's painted and ready to base, it's going to be trimmed down to a little bit less than the depth of the base. And these I think are 1.5 millimeter bases. So so you're going to paint the miniature. You're going to take it off whatever you're painting it on. You're going to trim that little pin down to, like I said, less than the depth of the base. Then you're going to go ahead and drill corresponding holes in the base with your pin vise, and then always test your fit before you do any gluing. And then once you're satisfied with what you've got, you're going to go ahead and glue it. Now here is the most important part of this whole process, is to understand that standard super glue, stuff like this, crazy glue, this ruins acrylic bases. It's fogging. As the chemical dries, it's going to leave behind a white residue. And I think any of us who saw Beverly Hills Cop 2 know that you can get fingerprints allegedly from a piece of glass using this stuff. Well, that clear acrylic base, it's going to have fingerprints. It's going to fog. It's going to be a mess. You're going to ruin your base. Don't use this. What you want to use for a metal figure. All right, there's actually two different ways that you can do this. One is applicable to Guild Ball miniatures. One is applicable to lots of other things. If you're using a plastic miniature, like I've also put these clear bases on some plastic figures I have for other games, you can actually use a model glue, like a plastic to plastic bonding glue. And I do use that for plastic figures. But for a metal figure, you need a glue which is not going to fog, but is still going to be strong enough to hold it onto the base. And so what I have found to be best is this little bad boy right here. This is BSI Super Gold Super Glue. This is just it's a different formula. They call it odorless. It's not perfect, but 9 times out of 10 you're going to be able to get that attachment without any significant fogging using this stuff. So it is definitely the product to get. I mail order it from Amazon, so you should be able to at least get it that way, if not find it locally. So the important points to remember here are, number one, that Super Gold has probably a lower viscosity than water. The stuff is going to go everywhere if you're not super careful. And while it won't fog the base, a streak of that glue on the base is going to be visually disruptive. So you want to use the smallest, most precise amount you can get. Be very careful not to get too much. Really be careful with it. Like I said, it's really, really fast moving stuff, and it's going to want to go everywhere. So just probably do some practice with it, and expect to ruin bases. I mean, I still probably have a success rate well below 1, and sometimes you just have to start over. It's not a perfect process, but bases are cheap. So that's another tip. Another tip: order more bases than you need. Some will get ruined. not just when you're doing the initial attachment, but over time. If you drop one of these bases, it's often hard to reattach it. It's sometimes better just to start over. Uh, and of course, there's always going to be mistakes in the attachment. So, so use the smallest amount of glue that you can get away with, and then one of the reasons to make sure that you use a small amount of glue is that even though they call it odorless, even though it's generally not fogging, enough of that stuff in one place, a big enough drop of that glue will still get a fringe of fog around it. It's just, I guess it's one of those things where you can't prevent sort of the natural behavior of the glue entirely. So go ahead and do that, and then next thing you know, you too can have super rad clear bases, just like your favorite Guild Ball podcaster. And if you're not using the same bases that Steve Newton uses, then go ahead and try out mine. So anyway, hope that I hope somebody finds that interesting, or at least entertaining. All right, very good. We'll catch you next time. Good night, everybody.